Okay, you're good to go. Have a good session.
Okay, thank you so much. So welcome everybody to the Friday morning, at least European time, Friday morning session Ask Me Anything of CHESS 2021. And it's my great honor and pleasure to introduce Bart Preneel, who I'm sure everybody knows in this room. And yeah, so what what we plan to do is 30 minutes of Q&A. You know, it's your once in your lifetime chance to talk to famous Bart. And you can, for me, it would actually be the easiest if people post your question either in the Zoom chat room here, but also you can speak up, which is great and makes it quite lively. So if you dare to just to speak up here in the Zoom room, that would be great, and you can also show your picture and open up your video if you want to. Yeah, but maybe to get started, I asked maybe Bart, you want to say a few words about your relationship to chess?
Of course. So many people don't know, but I actually have a background in electrical engineering, and I studied quite some hardware design. But then I did a PhD thesis in cryptography. And then actually in the late 90s, I had a student knocking on my door who was was working in a hardware center, but she kind of her PhD process didn't continue properly. And she asked whether I wanted to supervise her work on hardware. In fact, with her, we started to do side channel analysis. And so then we submitted paper to CHESS 2003, I think. That was my first CHESS. And since then, I really liked it. But I also have to point out that actually in my first ICR conference in the late 80s and early 90s, there were actually hardware papers in the Eurocrypts and the cryptos. But somehow everything got more competitive and shifted a bit more towards theory. And I guess that motivated the symmetric people to start FSE in the early 90s. And I guess Christoph and Chetin and others to start chess in the late 90s. And so, but since then, in 2003, I've been actually to a lot of chesses because I really like the conference. Because of course it's hardware, which is something I always was trained in, I really like very much, but also I think the topics are very varied and they deal with many new developments. Like we invited talks on a broad range of topics. I find it very interesting, always a very enriching conference. Also, I like to work a lot with industry, and of course at CHESS, people we worked with or we have experience with or collaborated with, they tend to come to CHESS, I guess, more now than to Eurocrypt, what was the case in the 90s.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and maybe a few words about me and Bart and me. I started doing crypto in early '95. Also, my PhD was in a different area, and Bart's name, of course, came up right away. Like probably the first week I started, looking in conference proceedings. Bart was quite famous already back then, and since Bart mentions the history of chess and how it relates to crypto. By the way, I'm wearing a hostile T-shirt here, so this is crypto 2015. Bart was very, very helpful to get chess included in the IRCR family, which is something that wasn't clear around the turn of the millennium, right? There were like the crazy hardware people doing their stuff, and this is something maybe that IRCR doesn't want to touch, and now it's quite the opposite. You know, IRCR people are very welcoming to our weird applied crypto stuff and so forth. So, and this is all thanks to Bart. So he did not only do a lot of good things for the crypto community at large, but also to the chess community, in fact. Yeah. So with these words, I would like to open up the podium, and Helena has a first question. Crazy hardware people, she says. Yeah. I'm share that with Bart. I'm also an electrical engineer by training, as some people know, and probably some other people in this room too. Yeah. So if you have questions, please feel free to speak up. I'll ask maybe Bart my first question. So, how do you see that development of chess relatively to crypto and Eurocrypt? Because when I started attending crypto and Eurocrypt, actually there was more applied stuff. And I think in the beginning, there was a more stricter separation between, cryptographic algorithms. That is something that happened at Crypto and Eurocrypt, and then chess is essentially the implementation people. And now the boundary has shifted, I think, Crypto and Eurocrypt in one direction, and we do also more crypto algorithms. I would be interested to hear your thoughts, which role maybe chess plays in the cryptographic universe.
Well, what I like about the topic of cryptography is that it's very broad and it goes from mathematics and theory to implementations. I think it's very nice that there is a close connection between the two. And we come up with crazy things in research, and it turns out that actually these things are very practical and can be widely deployed. And so I think that's interesting. And it's very valuable to have these two communities talk together. I guess it's very important to keep them together and keep talking to each other. I think if we could rewind, it would be probably better to have a few big conferences per year where everybody meets. I think for historical reasons, we've actually split up, and I think, of course, we do have very nice events. But I think if you look for the future, and I guess we'll have to also do our contribution to traveling less, and I guess we can choose to either sit more in Zoom rooms or maybe actually have fewer bigger events where everybody can meet and can interact. And I would really highly value that. I think that's something our community would be very valuable to have this. And what I like about chess is that it's very good at picking up new developments and following what's happening. Of course, hardware has become more important in cryptography. Maybe that's also something that is logic if you look at the history of chess. Of course, in the beginning, cryptography was only done in hardware because it was too expensive for software. And maybe it should be mentioned, maybe people don't know this, but Ron Rivest actually published several papers at Cryptos in the 80s trying to design RSA hardware. And as far as I know, he never succeeded to make RSA hardware work because the tools were not available to do it. It was not, of course, Ron is very smart, but I guess the tools were not capable of dealing with RSA in the mid-80s. That was a challenge. And then in the 90s, we realized we could do crypto in software, but of course then crypto moved back to hardware, and we got a lot of crypto in hardware. And now if you buy a processor, it has AES instructions. I guess it will be more support for cryptography. We've had secure processors. So I think there is a natural marriage between cryptography moving back to hardware and doing also research that takes this into account in the models. So I do think that therefore it's very important to keep the two communities together and to learn from each other. I also like very much specialized workshops where you can discuss among experts. I think it's also very nice to have a broader community where we can learn from each other what the developments are and where things are heading.
Yeah, no, thank you. These are very valuable thoughts. And I think also some people in this room might know that, but many not. So Bart was also instrumental to, we had for several years, we had chess co-located with crypto in Santa Barbara. And I think this was based on ideas of Bart to get the communities together, and it worked okay, I would say. It wasn't maybe, it wasn't the greatest success with interacting, but it also wasn't a failure, and we should continue working on that. So the first questions are coming in. I'm reading the first question from Helena Handschuh. Any predictions on the future intersection between cryptanalysis and side channel attacks? It's a very broad philosophical question there.
I think that there is actually a strong potential for more new ideas and improvements. I mean, of course, the first side channel attacks were very simple statistics. And if you now look at chess, you see that side channel attacks use much more advanced and complex statistics. And we also see deep learning being used, so much more complex analysis. But I think on the other hand, of course, what you do is you obtain some information on some specific cipher. And if you can use the structure of the cipher as well to improve the attack, then you can definitely further improve side channel analysis or better understand your countermeasures. I think there have been some papers that try to combine these two fields and to actually use more computing techniques in side channel attacks. But I think this is definitely something where further improvement can be made. But of course, it makes sense first to do it the easy way. But I think as defenses get better, as countermeasures get better, this is indeed an area where there is potential. So I would recommend side channel people to study cryptanalysis attacks and see how they can integrate them into their tools.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Bart. So the next question that came in came from Yun Feng. how will blockchain and hardware security intersect?
I think that's a difficult one because it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen. I guess at the blockchain side itself, of course, the idea there is everybody can verify things. And so you can actually, because everybody can verify it, we can all do it on untrusted machines because we all check each other. And I guess that's one part of the story. So in some sense, what blockchain tries to do is try to avoid or reduce our reliance on highly trusted servers where there is a few sysadmins who control everything or one player who controls everything. On the other hand, of course, and definitely if you move to the area of cryptocurrencies, but all important transactions on a blockchain, they're all driven by public key cryptography, which means that there is a private key to sign something and a public key to verify it. And of course, we still have to properly protect the private keys. I think this is something definitely where the need for better key management is coming forward. And of course, one part of this story is having secure hardware storage, but that's also easy to use secure hardware storage, because of course, we have our bank cards, which are easy to use. But if you ask people to manage keys for a CA, once you ever had to do this, you will find out it's actually very tricky and complicated. And so how can you make it very easy and convenient to manage those keys, to control assets on a blockchain, while still having strong hardware protection? And I think that's definitely an interesting point where there will be more need for clever ideas in terms of hardware.
Yeah, that's a good point. And if I may add something, I think there are all these stories of people that had very secure hardware tokens for their blockchain key, and they forgot the password, right? And then they have a encrypted USB token lying around, and it's worth whatever, $3 million, right? So that might be another challenge. You know, how do you do secure hardware storage that is also somehow allows recovery, you know, for lost passwords? Yeah. Okay, so the next question in chronological order came from Kevin. What do you think about ISCR starting a new journal?
Well, there have been some proposals circulating to do this. I think definitely our publication venues are not suboptimal. I think if you would start from scratch, you would probably do things differently. They have evolved over time. I do think that in the hardware community, I do think there is a good mechanism. I mean, you saw the statistics yesterday on PChess. I think in the end, about half the papers get accepted, sometimes after many iterations. I think that's a very good number. It shows that, in fact, you will not create by rejecting 80% of papers this kind of next layer of confidence and then the next layer of confidence and kind of infinite layer of confidence where results are being resubmitted and reviewed. So I do think that with t-chess, we have achieved a very nice model. So also the same model used by FSE. But I think in general, the community probably needs good publication venues that are actually guarantee quality and that also deliver gold or platinum or whatever you want open access. I think we have the tools and the means to do this ourselves, and we should avoid what's otherwise going to happen. So if a field is growing and as ICR we don't react, what happens is others will jump in and they will come with more restricted models publication and more scattering of the field. Yeah, and it's not that we have to have a monopoly as ICR, but I think as a large important player with actually the experts on board, I think we should actually make sure that we have the venues that can publish the output from the community. And we should avoid that people have to go to many other venues where there is probably more annoying access policies, where the editors, the publishers have more power over the authors, and we have this scattering where maybe it becomes very hard to get access to results. So I think it's important that the venues we have keep up. I don't think the problem is very pressing in the area of chess, but still I think it's something that should be considered. But of course, it's not something for me to decide, something for the community to decide whether they want this or not.
Good point, yeah. Yeah, Kevin, just to finish that, I've also said this as an example. So there is that the ISCR community has mostly ignored traffic analysis. So I don't know whether that's something where we want to look at a journal and might be an option. Yeah. So the next question came from Ayin. You already contributed to many publications in the cryptography area. What is your favorite topic in cryptography? And what is the underrated topic? Very good question. And the community should investigate more, in your opinion.
I think it's a difficult question because I tend to switch topics or do new topics all the time. So it's kind of, I guess my favorite topic is the one I'm currently working on.
Yeah.
So, but of course, I started my PhD thesis on cryptographic hash functions, and I still think that there is many problems. We now have better designs, but I still think it's a kind of understudied field. There is a lot of progress in analysis, but I still like to work on this once in a while. I think it's for the, but I think for the future, I want to work even more on is looking at how we can reconcile technology development with privacy and how to do this in practice, right? Of course, there is a lot of very nice theoretical developments, and probably I would not work on that. There is other smarter people than me doing that, but then we can deliver contribution how to roll this out in practice. So I was very happy to work in the past 1.5 years with Carmela, who gave a talk earlier this week on rolling out this proximity detection app. And so this is, I think, a very good example. In spite of the imperfections of this app, actually, it's something that is privacy preserving. It's a large scale infrastructure. We got about 100 million users in a very short time. And it's privacy preserving, which means that when this pandemic is behind us, hopefully in half a year or a year, we can actually shut this down and there will be no database left with all our interactions, which I think is something we should ideally also achieve in other areas where we can actually get benefit from interaction, but not have this fact that we have this digital trail where everything we do is being collected and analyzed. And I think this contact tracing shows it's in principle possible, in spite of all the shortcomings it had. It's in principle possible to do this. And I think this should encourage us to try to do this for more applications.
Excellent point. Yeah, thank you very much, Bart. Let's go to the next question by Muhammad. Any thoughts on the future of privacy-preserving technologies, e.g., how do you view homomorphic encryption versus confidential computing using trusted execution environments? Very broad question, which is a good fit for chess.
Yes, I think definitely there is also interest for chess in this. So there is a whole range of technologies where people try to improve security and privacy. And so the confidential computing says, I build a secure processor and please trust me. And then we can run things in private on there. I think that's one approach. And then, of course, we have the more cryptographic side, which is FHE, but also multi-party computation that seems to be a bit more efficient at this moment, where you say trust the cryptographers and not the software or the hardware. So you actually try to build trust by having multiple independent systems. I guess, of course, in practice, it's not so easy to have multiple independent systems because at this moment, there is 3 major cloud providers and you can assume they will not collaborate, but maybe if some 3-letter agency suggests to collaborate, then they will collaborate, or maybe they're forced to do this. So I think there is a challenge there as well. But I think it's definitely an important area where we can make a difference in society to kind of stop this mass surveillance situation, which was created in the last, I would say, 2 decades with technology. And we can try to get these technologies into use. Of course, at this moment, confidential computing, in some sense, wins because it's much more efficient, but you have a much higher trust relationship on the provider of the hardware and the person that runs the hardware, because how do you know the hardware is there? Well, there is attestation, but if this is corrupt, well, then you don't know. So the cryptographic approach is preferable, but of course, that is like 1,000,000 times slower, or was 1,000,000 times slower than what we could do in clear text. And so now we have already improved several orders of magnitude, but the question is how far can we push this? And I do think that hardware can play a role there. I just want to add one caveat there, and I think this is something that cryptographers and other researchers tend to do. We tend to oversell. So it's not because you do a computation in private, but actually it's legitimate or ethical to do it. So you can still run very discriminatory, very unfair, and very things which are bad for society, but all in the encrypted domain. It's not because something is in the encrypted domain that actually suddenly becomes a good computation to carry out. I think we should, as researchers, be careful for this, because we're selling our privacy technologies as improving humanity or a gift to humanity because we give them privacy and correct computations. But in fact, these computations may be unethical to do. So this is something we should be aware of, that we don't oversell this as the solution for all cures of humanity, because that could be very damaging in the long run as well.
Did you alluding to cryptocurrencies and how they're used for ransomware, or?
Not really. I mean, it's in general. I mean, there is quite some debates, for example, at the highest level in EU on ethics of AI. So, and of course,
okay,
you have lots of data. You can do computations, but these computations, depending on the bias in your data or depending on what you try to compute, can be creating discrimination or bias, or can be very unfair. And so, if you read research papers, introduction, people try to sell that this is all private, so it's all fine. And I think we should be aware that it's not because something is private, that actually the computation itself, the goal, what is being computed, or the data that's taken and the decisions that come out, it's not because they're done in private that they actually are ethical for society.
Yeah, can actually be, you could argue quite the opposite, right? Because you can do bad stuff in private, right?
Well, we can add transparency at least, that you know what's being done,
Yeah,
you know which computations, but that still doesn't justify doing certain computations.
Yeah. Excellent. No, we're getting into big discussions, which is good. So the next question comes from Johannes Mono. Would you like to see more ASIC-specific research in the crypto community?
Well, I mean, I've never done this myself, but of course, my colleague Ingrid has been doing quite some of this work. My understanding is it's actually not so easy to do it in academic environment. We need quite some budgets to do this, because I assume that if you want to do ASIC-specific research, you not only want to make designs in your computer, but also build them. And this is, of course, time-consuming and challenging, especially in the framework of a PhD, because there is some delays involved in the processing. But I think, yes, it's definitely something where academic world can make a difference by really building things and testing them at the ASIC level. And I guess there is some projects that allow you to do this, to kind of, you have multiple chips on one wafer, and then for a reasonable cost, you can do ASIC experiments. But I think it's definitely something where I would say it's a world where we still have a lot of security by obscurity, and not transparency. And I think we would benefit there from seeing what is possible in terms of attacks and defenses on those systems. But definitely there is a barrier of entrance there for academic researchers.
Yep, good point. Thank you. So the next question comes from Torben Moos. What can we do to keep politicians from demonizing secure crypto? Considering all this, quotation mark, our intelligence agency need to stay able to survey criminals, or if you don't have anything to hide, why encrypt your communication? Kind of nonsense.
Yes, this is kind of a debate. I mean, I only have 7 minutes left. I could give a 1-hour talk about this. I think the main message is that this is not a new debate. It keeps coming back. I mean, I remember I was involved in this first in time, the Clipper chip in 93. So this is when this debate started, when crypto became cheap enough so it could be in the hands of normal citizens, secure crypto at least. I think this debate is going to come back. And I think as researchers, we should keep repeating the message that, of course, society will be better off with protection. We also have curtains and we have locks on our doors. But at some moment, of course, these debates are very difficult and delicate, because, of course, those who want to limit or control cryptography, they will always come with the horsemen of the apocalypse, child pornography, kidnapping, terrorism. So I think society has to find a balance in there. But we have not been able, I think, to make systems that are magically secure for everybody, except for intelligence services, only on the days they really need it. And I think it's important that academics engage in this debate, because it's important that we keep sending this message as a community that it's more important to secure things. And of course, we have to also look at the problems. My main complaint is that the other side is not engaging enough. I see in the US, at least, there is some of these people who engage in debates. In Europe, it's even impossible to make them to come to a debate. Or if a meeting is scheduled at the EU level, it's canceled before it can even happen. You can't even discuss this topic, which I think is really bad for society.
That's an interesting observation. Yeah, thank you. So repeating the second question from Kevin, and I'm sorry I wasn't more clear about that earlier. Why has the IRCR community mostly ignored traffic analysis?
Well, I think it's just a different level of abstraction. And I think this is being dealt with. I mean, there is a pets community and now POPETs, they also have their hybrid journal, and I've also been active there. I think it's just a different level of abstraction, and there is different tools, different defenses. There is, of course, a lot of study in pets of Tor. There is now a renewed interest in mixed networks. So I think it uses slightly different tools and methods, and it's just embedded up in a different community. But of course, we understand it is as important to actually deduce intelligence or to actually protect yourself to deal with this. And I really hope that in the future we'll see tools like Signal being equipped or linked to a secure mixed network. I think that would be really interesting. There were a few papers already looking at the crypto of those things, because I think that I agree with that this was under research. I think at the last Eurocrypt there was a paper looking at this, at like what cryptographic needs are there for something that's as a mixed network. It's slightly different from what we have for, say, a Signal encryption or a messaging encryption.
Excellent, thank you. So next question is from Lauren. As someone who traveled to almost every conference before COVID, what is, according to you, the ideal conference format of the future post-COVID?
I still think we will want to meet in person, for sure. So I think ICR has done a great job, and I think kudos to Kevin and Kay, who were instrumental in this, in making the online experience as good as possible. But we still miss the coffee breaks, the informal talks with people. So I think this is something we try to replace, and there have been quite some efforts also at ICR level to have these chat rooms and so on, but it's just not the same. But I think if you look at the climate challenge, I think really ICR should rethink having all these small events, and we should probably decide to have one event per continent per year and all travel there and meet, maybe a long event where there can be overlapping parallel events, workshops and so on. So like, I think that would, I think for me, be perfect to have something like this, so that you can actually go to one event and catch up for many topics, but also with many people.
That's a good point. Yeah, we should definitely revisit that, I think, as a community. So Tim Gunesu is asking, FSE and Chess adopted the hybrid journal conference model for quite a while. Do you think that the flagship conferences, Crypto Eurocrypt and AsiaCrypt, should also move into this direction?
I think my personal view is they should, because personally I like the reviewing much better. I find the reviewing, which I've been doing for pets and for chess and for task, actually more constructive. So you actually are not like finding reasons why you should reject this paper, so there is room for some other papers, but you actually try to see how you can improve the paper, so actually it will make it into the program or in the publication. I think it's a much more positive attitude, and I actually like this better. It avoids also that papers are being reviewed and reviewed again with or without improvements, and I guess the last one is even worse. This is also the case that, I mean, we didn't invent this model, it came from VLDB, and also many of the security conferences, the big conferences, have moved to this model. So Oakland has moved to it, and I believe also NDSS. Of course, the problem we particularly face with Crypto, AsiaCrypt, and Eurocrypt is that it's kind of difficult to have each of them have 4 deadlines written up a year, because then we end up with a deadline every 2 weeks. So I think there were some proposals initially to do this, but we didn't have a good solution to this problem, that what are you going to do with Eurocrypt, AsiaCrypt, crypto? But I think in the next years, we will have to raise this question, maybe because we want to reduce travel, but also because people like this model. On the other hand, if there is a vocal part of the community that wants to keep things as they are, which I think was the case a while ago, I think there is also nothing wrong with keeping it. I think it's a decision the community should take whether we want this. But I think it's particularly complex because we have these 3 events which are more or less equal, but kind of hard to divide them up in another 3 pieces. There is too many pieces in the puzzle. But there must be a solution, but I think the community has to decide what they want there.
Yeah, good point. So I think there are 2 final questions, which are, of course, very serious questions from Bochum people. So first, Peter Schwabe. When will a concert of your big band feature in a crypto conference again?
Well, if it's close enough to Belgium, I'll take my band there, I promise. Last tour, when we went to Latvia, so I'm very happy to bring my band over if it's within the driving range. I mean, flying with the band is a bit of a challenge. It's very expensive to get the bigger instruments. But if it's in a drivable distance, I'm happy to show up with my band for sure.
Okay, the chess steering committee
And we can also
takes,
provide
takes notes. Yeah, okay. And then Amir Moradi is asking, how often do you read the book proceedings behind you?
They're more there to dampen the sound in the room.
Okay.
Maybe hard for people to understand, but like 30 years ago, getting access to these books was difficult. Getting access to information was difficult, I think, until about 25, 20 years ago, when we had ePrint. So these things were very valuable. I guess now you could just kick them out, but it turns out that if you do this, which some of my colleagues did, then these rooms, these university rooms, sound terrible. They have an echo of a very large echo. So these books are very good for insulation and dampening.
Yeah. Okay, I think this is Punktlandung, as they say. You know, we ran 1 minute over, which is pretty good. There's a quick follow-up from Muhammad. Do you see any sense, for instance, a use case in trusting hardware without attestation, because confidential computing consortium does not include it in the essential properties?
Well, it all depends on who you want to trust. I mean, if you're talking to a computer somewhere and this computer says, I'm secure, and nobody even attests any properties about this computer, but we just believe it. But if you want to trust, if you're a bit naive, or you're willing to trust, or you have other mechanisms, maybe you have audits or so to check this, I think it can be fine. In general, I would be a skeptic, and I would like to see as much evidence as possible that I'm really talking to a secure computer. But I think we have to acknowledge that there can be non-cryptographic or non-technical means to check that this is really this computer, and that this computer really has this processor. So I can understand that it's not always necessary, but of course, then you need other mechanisms, and I think you have to be very careful about how these mechanisms can be corrupted.
Yeah, good point. Okay, so I think that concludes the session. Thanks so much, everybody, in particular Bart, of course. This was very enlightening. I learned a lot in the last 32 minutes. Yeah, give a big applause to Bart.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a ton to Kay and Kevin, of course, you know, for coaching me and helping me out. And it was a great experience. And I like the format a lot with Ask Me Anything. So with these words, I think there's half an hour break, and then the next session